We
are
We are
cultivate.
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 We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to a special mini-sode of Ye Olde Crime, the show where Maddie and I discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear every Wednesday. This special bi-weekly segment is called Can You Crack the Cramp-Word, which is slang for a difficult or obscure term, which I thought was very fitting. And joining me today are Jill and Allison from the Keep the Flame Alive podcast. And before we begin, I'd like to give them the opportunity to tell us a little more about themselves and their show before we get started.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. I am Jill.
I am Allison. I sound a bit like the Victorian grandmother who's gotten sent to the seaside with a tea of arsenic. So we'll see how this goes.
And we are hosts of Keep the Flame Alive. It's the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. So every week we talk to athletes about how their sports work. We talk to people behind the scenes. We learn about history, anything around the Olympics and Paralympics we are curious about. And then we have a wonderful base of listeners who also love not just the Olympics and Paralympics, but they love multi-sport events and love geeking out about them. So there's that. And then when the games are on, we have daily coverage. We were both in Beijing for both of there for the Paralympics, and I was there for the Olympics. And we will be at Paris 2024 for the Olympics. And we're accredited for the Olympics and hopefully the Paralympics. We have not found out about that yet.
Nice. My first question is, how did the two of you meet and come up with the idea to start your podcast?
So we met working together many years ago. And at the time, we worked in an open office, and it was during Salt Lake City. So we would just turn around and talk about what was happening and geek out on our own. And then many years later, we were no longer working together. We were no longer in the same city, but we were visiting each other. And it's all Jill's fault. This was totally Jill's idea. And I just said yes, having no idea what I was agreeing to. And we've been doing this since 2017.
Yeah, so we did work together, Allison. We worked at a consulting firm in the library. So I started there after the Atlanta 1996 games. Allison started after Sydney 2000, and then Salt Lake City 2002 happened during her tenure there. Then I left a few years after her and went freelance to be a freelance writer. And I missed having water cooler talk about the Olympics. And I had moved from Chicago to Boston area and had a great group of friends who loved the opening ceremony. So we would have these elaborate opening ceremony parties. And then they might watch some of the games, but it was more I really missed geeking out with somebody who would be like, "Oh, taekwondo is on? I know nothing about taekwondo, but I
Yeah.
gotta watch it." So, I tried to start a blog, and that was still very lonely and a lot of work, but I loved podcasts. And yes, Allison came through, and I was like, "Hey, podcast." She said, "Yeah."
And here you are. So you mentioned that you actually go to the different places to do daily coverage. That's insane to me. Like, when did that start?
Beijing. That was the
Beijing?
first. Beijing was the first we had accreditation for, and it was insane. Jill was there for the whole time. I was only there for the Paralympics, and yet with my 2 weeks, I managed to get lost on a mountain, break a bathroom, slide down another hill. I mean, crazy things happen when you're in the winter in Beijing.
I can only imagine.
So yeah, that was our first, and we started the podcast a few months before the 2018 Winter Games. So it was way too late to go there for
Yep.
us, and we just did it from the couch. Tokyo, I was supposed to go as a fan because we again missed the accreditation window, and then nobody could go to Tokyo because of COVID.
Yep, for obvious reasons, yep.
We had talked about it and said, "No, we don't really want to go to China. That's going to be really difficult." And then, like day or so before the accreditation deadline, my husband and I were enjoying some beverages, and I told him that, "Oh, the deadline's coming up," and he goes, "Oh, you should just apply anyway." And so I did, and then a few months later, we got the accreditation, and I said, "Oh, wow, how'd we get accredited?" And then I remembered I applied, and I never told Allison I did that.
So I saw the email first, and I
Oh.
texted Jill saying, What is this? What do you mean we're going to China?"
Get your passport ready.
Yeah, and that's actually funny because my passport was going to expire, and I had to do a rush to get the in on time because I did not know she had done this. But it was actually such an amazing experience, so I forgive her drunken application.
Sometimes that's the way to do it.
Yes, and then so, of course, we were applying for Paris, and I was very upfront. "Hey, I'm getting the application in. Hey, why don't you look at this? What do you think?"
Mentally prepare yourself in case we get approved so you're not startled by it.
Yeah, and it's a long time. I mean, Jill was in China for 7 weeks altogether,
Jeez.
and and that was very lonely. She was very happy when I got there.
Mhm.
I can only imagine, yeah.
And with China and the COVID, so it was masks and not really talking to a lot of people, and it was very isolated. Thank goodness for the volunteers. They were just the greatest kids
That's good.
and kept us entertained the whole time.
I can imagine how very isolating that would be. I would have no idea what to do. I would get there and be like,
Yeah, and I happen to be good at putting myself into situations where I don't know anybody, but I'm also very quiet and don't
mhm,
talk until I really get used to a place. And so with being in China and not knowing hardly any of the language besides like
mhm,
thank you, and I knew how to say 8 because I had watched enough archery at Beijing 2008 to know the scores. I just in masks, I just didn't talk to very many people
mhm,
and kind of looked around. I looked around to figure stuff out, and I would talk to people here and there, but nothing like striking up conversations in a bus
mhm.
was tough to do.
Yeah.
I
Or
did it.
yeah, well, you're talking. That's also why you're here. You're very successful as a talker, and that's what makes our show good.
It's you know what? We are very, very different, and I joke about the Bert and Ernie dynamic. Jill has notes for today. Jill's texted me about prepping for our talk today. I'm like, "I listened to a few shows. I'm gonna wing it. Let's Lindsay sounds lovely. Let's just figure it out." So I was definitely I got I would just talk to anybody on the bus, and it didn't matter how good their English was. I had a conversation with a Korean man who spoke no English and ended up giving us gifts. He gave us, like, Korean Team Korea scarves and hats,
Aw.
and all I told him was, "Team Korea, yay!" Because we were going to a hockey match, and I liked the Korean team, so I told him, and so he gave me all this stuff, and that's kind of how the show works very much because we're both very different, but we both have the same passion. We
Mhm.
just come at it from a different angle.
So that kind of gives me a nice segue to my next question, which is I don't know if this would make more sense for when you're at home watching it or when you're in person, but I'm still going to ask it. So, do you each take turns watching the events, or how do you take the time to report on everything that's taking place?
You can't. That's the first thing. 2 people cannot possibly cover everything.
Hmm.
So, we both just picked what we were interested in, what we wanted to see. We also prioritize seeing the athletes that we've interviewed.
Hmm.
We call them Team Keep the Flame Alive, which we've created our own country for, which is Shukflistan. So, we prioritized watching them, and sometimes 2 or 3 of them would be competing at the same time. It's 2 weeks of chaos, so there's no worry about overlap,
There you
and
go.
it's, "Okay, which do you wanna watch? Which are we gonna prioritize?" So it's really a point of how much can we do because we're not NBC.
Hmm.
So we try and do the things that NBC isn't going to do. Like, we have to get to these events on our own. We don't
Hmm.
have a car service. We don't have all this staff.
Hmm.
So that became a big part of the story, like, what is actually happening when you're there that you don't get to see on TV?
Sure.
Yeah, and when we were doing them from the couch, it would be you watched anything you could.
Mm-hmm.
and then you found out when we recorded who saw what. And that was kind of the interesting part. And then when I was in China and Allison was on the couch, because I could see one event, maybe two events a day, depending on where I was going and what I was doing, because it would take 3 hours to get to the furthest place out. And you'd sometimes travel for 3 hours, taking like two buses and a train and another two buses to get to something that would take an hour and a half. And you had to get there early because you had to be there in order to get a space in the workroom. Otherwise, couldn't work at all,
Mm-hmm.
and it got to be very, very complicated, so we relied a lot on getting to watch the feeds, because sometimes you do get feeds in a workroom and you can watch other events. They have lots of systems in the background where you can get news and updates and more stories that the Olympics and Paralympics provide for you, so you can get a little bit more information that way. But yeah, it is splitting up and then just trying to see what our listeners want to know about. And all of the athletes have to go through something called a mixed zone after competition, which can be fun if you had a good day. If you've had a bad day, you don't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So they have to go to NBC is one of the first people there.
Mm-hmm.
And usually NBC stops them and they always ask, "Oh, how was the race?" You always
Yeah.
get that after thing. And they always ask the same question. By the time they get to us, we'll make our pitch for like, please stop, even if you've had a
Mm-hmm.
bad day, because they don't have to talk to you.
Yeah.
But you'd be like, hey. And I did go to see one of our Shukflastanis like, one of the first nights, and it's freezing cold night, it's moguls, and he just had the worst competition. He's going through the mix zone. I don't even know if I'm in the right place. I found out 2 days later I had been following the mixed zone procedures all wrong because I just walked in, and you're supposed to, like, apply for space and all that jazz, and I'm freezing cold. The cold saps your batteries, so I'm dealing with battery problems. I had a shotgun mic, all the O-rings are breaking off, so this mic is kind of jingling all about, and I see him, and I'm like, "Bradley!" And he doesn't wanna talk to me, and like, "I have something for you!" And I'm trying to throw him a little pin that we give to all our
Yep.
guests, and he didn't wanna stop, and he was nice enough to talk, and that was helpful. When we wanted to talk to athletes, we'd have listeners say, "We wanna know what the snow is like there. What's it like to ski on this snow?" So that's what we would talk about with them. Not we'd be like, "Yeah, we know you had a tough day. It's not fun
Yeah.
to finish at the bottom,
Yeah.
but, like, what's the snow like? What's" it got really warm during the Paralympics, so it was like, these poor skiers skiing with only their upper bodies, trying to, like, maneuver them pull themselves through slush. That was really interesting to hear, like, what it affected on their bodies, if they have maybe one arm, how does that what does that do to the balance of your muscles and your
Sure.
tendons and understanding that. So we got some that kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing we care about. We care about, like, if speed skaters wear socks.
I like that.
The things you think about but never get a chance to ask, we get this amazing opportunity to ask.
Yeah.
And, like, the swimmer who has gorgeous hair, "What shampoo do you use?"
What sort of product do you put in your hair?
Yeah, "How often do you have to shave?" The things that you really want to know, but God forbid anyone would ask them, I have no shame in asking them.
Mhm.
Well, and it's one of those things too where you can only Google so much, and Google doesn't know all the answers to everything. And it's better to
Right?
hear it from the people that are actually doing it and using it and whatever.
It makes the sport so much more interesting. So we had a conversation recently with a pole vaulter, and we were talking all about poles, and I just thought everybody had the same pole. Oh, no. There's, like, a whole science behind what pole you use, when you use it. How do you take it on the airplane? And now when I watch
Oh.
pole vaulting, I'm so much more amazed. I mean, I'm always amazed you fling yourself, you know, I don't know how many feet, way too many feet in the air, and it's so much more than that, and that's what I think we get from the athletes and from people behind the scenes.
Hmm.
Did you know that every team has a doctor and every team has a translator and all these things you don't think about?
That's cool. So, I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions.
Okay. Like our lightning round that was
Kind of like
never
a lightning
lightning?
round, but it'll be, you know, at whatever pace
Not
you
so
choose to
lightning.
take it. Maybe a thunder round. Do you have a favorite event or a sport that you enjoy watching? It can be from winter, summer, whatever.
Well, last summer at the Paralympics, oh, now it's 2 summers ago, I absolutely fell in love with wheelchair rugby. It
Oh.
was just demolition derby, wheelchair basketball. I didn't know half of what was going on. I didn't care. The speed and the skill of these athletes was so amazing and just a really fun game to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a fun one. And also during Tokyo, I discovered dressage and realized it was like ice dancing with horses.
Mm.
And again, the skill and talent and work of both athletes, human and horse, really excited me. But, I'm old school. I love gymnastics and ice skating and diving, and I'll watch almost anything.
Cool.
For the Paralympics in Tokyo, because that was the first big one we got to watch. That was the first big one with a lot of coverage because NBC had some coverage in Rio 2016, but it was really confusing, and that was when we weren't around as a podcast yet, and I didn't understand what was going on. Now I understand the Paralympics and their classification system where they sort athletes into groups based on abilities so
Mm-hmm.
that there's an even playing field. So that's why you'll have like 10 swimming races that are the same distance. They're just different classes. But
Sure.
at Tokyo, we also discovered two visually impaired sports that I loved, which were goalball, which is you sit on the floor, you're a team of 3, there's 3 on the court, and you roll a ball across the floor into trying to get it into the opposite team's net.
Okay.
That's really great. They have this ball that jingles and you listen to it. Then the other visually impaired sport that I just adored, and I cannot wait to see this in Paris, is football five-a-side. So it's soccer with 5 people. Again, visually impaired. Again, jingly ball. But there is so much chaos going on and people, coaches yelling from the sideline. Like, in goalball, they yell at you to say quiet, please, for the when the play is on, because so that the people can hear the ball. And this, no, just running and yelling, and everyone's running into each other, and they manage to get goals. And if there's somebody who's going to do a penalty kick, there's somebody from their team who comes out and has a little metal rod, and they bang all around the goal so that the athlete gets like a mental picture of where the goal is in relation to where they are and where the ball is and how wide the goal is. It's just that's amazing to me. Summer, I will watch anything, but I do love BMX racing.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is really cool. I swam when I was a little kid, so I'm always gonna have a soft spot for swimming. Always have a soft spot for gymnastics. On the winter, I also love figure skating, but I do love biathlon. And biathlon is just an amazing sport. It is up and down. You never know who is going to win on any given day. It's so difficult with skiing, and then your heart's racing and you have to calm it down to shoot 5 targets down and then do more laps of that. And that's so cool. And then I also love snowboard cross.
Okay.
Again, the demo it's kinda like BMX, but on a mountain.
That's cool.
And then big air.
Oh, I do love Big Air. Big Air is really cool. Big Air is really cool.
When Jill went to see Big Air in person, she would not stop telling me. So we record the show, and of course, we'll talk a little bit before, a little bit after. But when she was in China, that was kind of her lifeline back home. So we would
Mm-hmm.
have whole conversations that didn't make it onto the show. And the day she went to Big Air, she was like, "Oh my god, Big Air is the best thing ever. Too bad you can't come and see it in person." I'm like, "Thanks. Next time, I guess."
So cool.
That's awesome. Well, I don't have any more questions unless there's something else you think people should know about the show.
Well, Lindsay, we thought for Ye Old Crime Podcast, the Olympics history is not that old, not the modern Olympics, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a fair amount of crime among Olympians. We thought we'd bring you a Ye Old Olympic crime moment if you're up for it.
Ooh, sure.
All right. So I'd like to tell you the story of James Snook, and our sources for this are the Columbus Dispatch, Columbus Underground, Olympedia, the complete book of the Olympics 2008 edition by David Walachinsky and Jamie Loki, and the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine.
Because we're librarians by training, we cite our sources.
And
I
I
cite
know what
mine
you do
too,
too.
so yep. Cite them at the
We're
top.
with you.
So James Snook was a veterinarian who specialized in equine surgery, and he was a professor of veterinary science who at the age of 40 competed at the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp. And these were the first games after World War I. So Europe is pretty devastated. Antwerp is barely able to host the games, but the games needed to make a comeback, and they certainly did. So James was a shooter, and he won 2 gold medals as part of the men's military pistol team and the men's 50-meter free pistol team. So these were the days that shooting is a interesting sport in that there are tons of really wild events that happen.
Mhm.
There's like running deer, all of these things that went on.
Live pigeons was an
Oh,
event at one
God, yep.
point.
But Antwerp was actually the last games to feature this military shooting event. But James was good, part of the team. They captured gold. He is an Olympic gold medalist. And then also in 1920, Snook became a professor of veterinary medicine at the Ohio State University. And in 1922, he got married to a 6th grade teacher, and they soon had a daughter. And during this time, Snook also invented something called the Snook hook, which is still used today in spaying and neutering cats and dogs.
Hmm.
So in 1926, summer loving got the best of him, and he took up with a 21-year-old student named Theora Hicks, who was
Aw.
working at the College of Veterinary Medicine as a stenographer to earn her room and board. So
Oh, the sexy stenographers get you every time, Professor.
It's those tights with like the line up the back.
So they started up an affair. Apparently, this was not much of a secret around the department. And they even got an apartment together
Ooh.
close to the college and passed themselves off as a married couple to their landlord for 3 years. So
Wow.
eventually, Hicks got tired of being the other woman, and on June 13th, 1929, asked Snook to get a divorce and threatened to kill his wife and child if he didn't. So Snook did not take kindly to that threat. And oddly enough, he did not grab his gun. Instead, he beat Hicks with a hammer. And after she collapsed and started moaning, he cut her jugular vein to, quote, relieve her suffering, end quote.
You know, the humane thing to do.
Right.
The veterinarian in him came out.
Yeah.
Didn't want her to suffer that way.
Yeah.
So police arrested him that month, and he went to trial that summer for first-degree murder. This was like the trial of the century type trial, all summer
Mhm.
long, very popular. During it, surprisingly, Snook's lawyers did not raise an argument. And when the case went to the jury, it only took them 28 minutes to find him guilty. Snook's lawyers also did not appeal because, it's amazing that they just went, yeah, you are so guilty. We're just
Yeah.
here for the money. And Snook was sentenced to death, executed in the electric chair on February 28th, 1930.
Wow.
It would have been more poetic if he had faced a firing squad.
This is true, but I know like they abolished that, and I can't remember when they abolished that, but yeah. I think there's only one person in recent history who was able to request that and have it allowed.
Oh.
I'll have to look that up. And by recent history, I mean like 1950s, something like that, but not a very common way to go these days. That was interesting. Thank you for sharing
You're
that.
welcome.
Well, on that note, are you ladies ready for some Victorian slang terms?
I am so ready for this.
I've had my arsenic tea, so I may not survive, and the heirs will get the family silver. But we'll see how this goes.
We'll just say you have tuberculosis and put you outside, give you some exposure therapy, and that'll help.
I'm a consumptive headed for the seaside.
Just let me sit outside in my furs. So, Jill, you're up first.
All right.
Your first term is Jack. Jack.
Jack. Well, I'm really glad you asked me this one.
Because her name's Jill.
Well, that too.
It wasn't intentional, but I started thinking about it after you said that. Like, oh.
But this was a technique used in men's gymnastics when it was first developed in the early 1900s as it was a military exercise type of thing. And the jacking motion was the way you got yourself up on the steel rings in order to be able to start your routine.
Oh. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
Did you just make that up?
I enjoy the game Balderdash.
I was like, that's really cool. You totally had me fooled. No, that is not.
Oh.
That is not. You're going to be really
thought-
disappointed when you find out what it actually is.
Oh, I thought it was a lesbian.
It's actually a term for a low prostitute. So a low sex worker. So I'm assuming it's
Yeah.
a down on her luck sex worker, which makes me kind of sad. That's a jack.
Very interesting. All right. Good to know.
That also uses stationary rings to perform her routine.
Different kind of gymnastics.
This is true. So, Allison, your first term is filibrush.
I feel like it should have something. So this is slang. It's not an actual thing
Mm-hmm.
because it's like I would think all the Victorian hair would fill a brush. It's like a. See, I do not play Balderdash.
I don't either. That's why I fell for that hook, line, and sinker.
I know. That was impressive.
I was just like, wow.
I know. And I've known Jill a really long time. And I was like, is that real?
We were both like hanging off every word you said.
I know. I think filibrush has something to do with horses. I have no idea what, but I'm going to go with it's horse related.
Okay. Well, filibrush is slang for to flatter or to praise ironically.
Stroking somebody's ego.
There you
That's
go.
a nice horse you got there.
That's what we like to call a filibrush. So, Jill, your second term is horrors. So, like HORRORS. Horrors.
Horrors. This is a tough one because I also officiate roller derby, and I used to be in Boston, and one of the Boston roller derby's home teams are the Harbor Horrors. So I always think of it as, roller derby related, but maybe it has something to do with a hysterical condition that one gets when one goes swimming in the sea in a very shoulder to ankle swimsuit that may be weighted down so it doesn't rise up and expose your legs to the masses.
Oh, I like that. Horrors is the low spirits or the blue devils which follow intoxication.
Oh,
Sort of like how we got our accreditation.
I think you did
I'm
say
just
the
gonna-
horror of it all.
I'm just going to do this and see what happens.
Oh, we're going to end up in China. This is great.
NBD.
Allison, your second term is CAG-MAG. So CAGMAG.
This has got to do with kitchen wench kind of things. Like something in the kitchen, like a woman who can't do something.
You were on the right track with the kitchen.
Oh.
So a CAG-MAG is bad food, scraps, or odds and ends, or essentially something that no one would want to eat.
Yet again, we could bring that to the horses.
You could. Or to the pigs, The pigs eat any CAG-MAGs you throw at them, that's for sure.
I'm impressed that there were keg mags back then, because one would think that there would be not much, a lot of food insecurity, and so one would eat most of your food, except for maybe if you have an upstairs downstairs situation,
Yeah.
and then the upstairs doesn't. Well, I cannot eat anymore because otherwise my corset will be tighter than ever.
Mm-hmm. This is true. You can only tighten them so far before you're like, either passing out or getting physically ill. So I can see
Fainting couches.
that. Yeah.
Slide them in. So it's funny we're talking about fainting couches because when we do talk about Olympic history, there's a lot of discussion of obviously women and women in sports.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a lot of concern about, can women's bodies handle this? So there are times when we come across these Victorian men from the 2010s who are very concerned that our delicate frames will just not be able to handle those big, scary skis.
Our delicate bird bones.
Mm-hmm. Body parts falling out everywhere.
Yep.
It would be a cag mag.
Yep. Then we really will have the horrors. On that note, I would like to thank Jill and Allison for joining me today for Can You Crack the Cramp-Word? And before we go, can you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and when new episodes of your show come out?
Sure. New episodes of the show come out every Thursday. And then once the games start, just look for them every day. And that will be in July. We are like 500 days out until the Paralympics right now. So the Paris 2024 Olympics start July 26th. So we will have daily episodes starting a little bit before that because the games actually start before the games start. If you can wrap your head around that. But
The pre-games.
Exactly. And then Allison, on social, we are.
So on social, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and our handles are at FlameAlivePod. And then our website is flamealivepod.com. And we have our episodes there, and we hang out and love to hear from everybody.
That's awesome. And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay, and I'll see you next time with another tale as old as crime.